For years, Riverbridge Birthing Center got away with quiet discrimination. A nurse who thrived on power routinely shamed patients, her reports filled with lies that buried their voices. In the waiting room, a black mother fed her infant, exhaustion written in every line of her face. She nursed openly, calm and unashamed, refusing to hide the most natural act of care. The nurse saw it as defiance, and her disdain exploded into violence. She slapped the mother across the cheek. What no one realized was that this mother was the CEO, and within 10 minutes, the entire staff was fired. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Riverbridge Birthing Center, casting long shadows across the waiting room's pale blue walls. Imani Caldwell shifted in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her 8-week-old daughter Nova nestled against her chest. The constant worry about Nova's low-grade fever had kept her up most of the night, but she maintained her usual composed demeanor. She glanced around the waiting area, taking in the mix of expectant mothers and new parents. A few nodded in quiet acknowledgement, the universal language of tired parents. Nova's soft whimpers grew more insistent, and Imani recognized the signs immediately. Her daughter was hungry. Without hesitation, Imani adjusted her casual cotton shirt and positioned Nova to nurse, using a light blanket for privacy more out of habit than obligation. The familiar sensation of Nova latching on brought a small smile to her face, despite her exhaustion. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, mother and daughter connected in this simple act of love. The sharp click of approaching footsteps broke through their peaceful bubble. Nurse Mara Kincaid's shadow fell across them, her presence as cold as a draft from an open window. Imani looked up to find the nurse's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes sharp with disapproval. "Ma'am," Mara's voice carried across the waiting room, loud enough to draw attention. "That kind of behavior is inappropriate here. We have a private room for that." She gestured vaguely toward Imani and Nova, her nose wrinkling slightly. Imani took a steady breath, keeping her voice level. "My daughter is hungry and we're waiting for her appointment. There's nothing inappropriate about feeding her. There are standards of conduct here," Mara continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "Other patients shouldn't have to be exposed to this display." She emphasized the last word as if describing something distasteful. A few other mothers in the waiting room shifted uncomfortably. One woman caught Imani's eye and shook her head slightly, clearly embarrassed by the nurse's behavior. "I'm well aware of the law," Imani replied, her voice firm but controlled. "I have every right to feed my child here. Nova needs to eat, and I won't make her wait or move to another room as if we're doing something wrong." Mara's posture stiffened, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. "Perhaps you don't understand how things work here. We have rules." "I understand perfectly," Imani cut in, still maintaining her composure despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "What I don't understand is why you're creating an issue where there isn't one. Several other mothers here have nursed their babies today without comment." Nova squirmed slightly, disturbed by the tension in her mother's voice. Imani stroked her daughter's back soothingly, refusing to let Mara's prejudice disrupt this moment with her child. "Well," Mara's voice took on an even more patronizing tone, "those mothers were more discreet, more considerate of others' comfort." The implication hung heavy in the air. Imani noticed how Mara's eyes skimmed over her dark skin, how her lips curled slightly at the edges. It was a familiar look, one that suggested Imani somehow didn't belong, didn't measure up to some unspoken standard. "My daughter's comfort is my priority," Imani stated firmly, "and there's nothing indiscreet about what I'm doing." Other parents in the waiting room had grown quiet, the tension palpable. A young mother across the room deliberately began nursing her own infant, making eye contact with Imani in silent solidarity. Mara's face flushed red. "If you can't follow our guidelines, show me these guidelines," Imani challenged, her voice steady but intense. "Show me where it states that a mother can't feed her hungry child in the waiting room." The nurse's mouth opened and closed, no ready answer available. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard until her knuckles whitened. "That's what I thought," Imani said softly, turning her attention back to Nova. Mara turned on her heel, her shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. As she reached the nurse's station, she turned back, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Some people just don't know how to act in public." The words landed like a slap, but Imani refused to flinch. She kept her eyes on Nova's peaceful face, counting her daughter's steady breaths. The familiar ache of dealing with such prejudice settled in her chest, but she pushed it aside. Nova needed her calm and focused, especially with the fever they were here to check. Around her, the waiting room gradually returned to its previous quiet murmur. A woman sitting nearby caught her eye and gave her an encouraging smile. Imani nodded back, grateful for the small gesture of support. Nova finished nursing, and Imani gently burped her, the routine motions helping to center her thoughts. She knew there would be more confrontations ahead. There always were. But for now, she focused on the warm weight of her daughter in her arms, on the soft sound of Nova's breathing, on the strength that flowed between them like an unbreakable thread. A short while later, Nova's cries pierced the tense quiet of the waiting room again. Imani immediately recognized the hungry wail and began to position her daughter to nurse again. The few remaining patients kept their eyes fixed on magazines or phones, the earlier confrontation still hanging heavy in the air. The familiar click of heels announced Mara's return before Imani even looked up. This time, the nurse wasn't alone. She had another staff member hovering behind her, as if seeking backup. "Mrs. Caldwell!" Mara's voice cut through Nova's cries, sharp as a blade. "You need to stop that right now and come with me to the private nursing room." Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest, her stance rigid with authority. Imani continued helping Nova latch on, keeping her voice steady. "No, thank you. We're fine right here." She glanced around the nearly empty waiting room, where only 3 other patients sat scattered across the space. "There's plenty of room, and Nova needs to eat." "This is not a request." Mara stepped closer, her shadow falling across Imani and Nova. "It's hospital policy. You will come with me now." Each word was clipped, loaded with barely contained frustration. The second staff member shifted uncomfortably behind Mara, clearly unsure about the escalating situation. A young mother across the room pulled out her phone, holding it low but unmistakably recording. "My daughter has a fever," Imani explained, struggling to keep her voice level. "I'm not moving her unnecessarily or interrupting her feeding. She's vulnerable right now, and she needs to eat." Mara's face twisted with obvious disdain. "If you can't follow simple instructions, how can we trust you're following proper care procedures at home?" The implication in her tone was clear, hitting a nerve that generations of black mothers had endured. "Excuse me?" Imani's voice dropped dangerously low. "Are you questioning my ability to care for my child?" "Your behavior today certainly raises concerns," Mara shot back. She reached for her clipboard, pen poised. "Perhaps we should document this incident for the record." Nova squirmed, disturbed by the tension. Imani stroked her daughter's back soothingly, trying to maintain the calm bubble around them despite her rising anger. "The only thing you need to document is your own inappropriate behavior and discrimination. That's it." Mara's face flushed red. "This is becoming a safety issue." She suddenly reached forward, hands extending toward Nova. "The child needs to be properly evaluated. Don't you dare touch my baby!" Imani pulled back instinctively, shielding Nova with her body. Her heart hammered in her chest as Mara's hands came closer. "Hospital policy clearly states—" Mara grabbed at Nova's blanket, trying to pull the baby away from Imani's breast. Everything happened in a flash. Imani twisted away from Mara's grasp, protecting Nova. The nurse, thrown off balance, straightened up, and then her hand swung out, connecting with Imani's cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the waiting room. The sound hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Nova wailed, startled by the sudden movement and noise. Imani's cheek burned where Mara's hand had struck her, but she remained frozen, holding Nova close to her chest, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The waiting room fell into absolute silence except for Nova's cries. The young mother with the phone had stood up, her hand over her mouth. The second staff member took several steps back, clearly wanting no part of what had just occurred. Mara seemed shocked by her own action, her hand still hanging in the air. For a brief moment, fear flashed across her face, quickly replaced by a defensive scowl. "You see?" she announced to the room at large, voice shaking slightly. "This is exactly the kind of situation our policies are meant to prevent." The double doors to the waiting room burst open as two security guards rushed in, their boots squeaking against the linoleum floor. Imani's heart sank as she watched their eyes scan the scene and immediately fix on her. The black woman standing while everyone else sat, the crying baby, the white nurse in her pristine uniform. "Ma'am?" The larger guard approached Imani, his hand hovering near his belt. "I need you to calm down and step aside." "Calm down!" Imani's voice came out barely above a whisper. "She just slapped me while I was holding my baby." "Please step aside, ma'am," the guard repeated, moving closer, positioning himself between Imani and Mara. His partner circled around, creating a barrier that effectively isolated Imani from the rest of the room. Imani stood her ground, though her legs felt weak. Nova continued to cry against her chest, and she could feel her daughter's tears soaking through her shirt. The injustice of the moment pressed down on her like a physical weight, the guards treating her as the threat, Mara's smug expression behind them, the other patients watching in uncomfortable silence. "I will not step aside," Imani declared, her voice growing stronger despite the tremble in her hands. "That nurse just assaulted me and my infant daughter. I'm not moving anywhere. Ma'am, if you continue to be uncooperative—" The guard's hand moved closer to his belt. The young mother, who had been recording, spoke up from across the room. "She's telling the truth. I got it all on video. The nurse hit her." But the guards kept their attention fixed on Imani, their stance making it clear whom they viewed as the problem. Mara had retreated behind the nurse's station, already scribbling furiously on her clipboard, no doubt crafting her version of events. With Nova still crying against her chest, Imani took a deep breath and reached for her phone with her free hand. The security guards watched her every move, their stance tense. She kept her voice steady as she dialed Ty's number, knowing he was waiting in the car outside. "Ty? I need you to come get Nova." Her voice cracked slightly. "There's been an incident." "What happened?" Ty's voice carried clear concern through the speaker. "Just come now, please. Main entrance." She ended the call, keeping her eyes locked with the larger security guard. "My partner is coming to take our daughter. Then we can discuss what happened here." Mara's smirk grew wider behind the desk. "Oh, we'll definitely be discussing what happened. I'm already documenting your aggressive behavior." Less than a minute later, Ty's tall frame appeared in the doorway. His military training showed in how quickly he assessed the scene. The security guards, Imani's reddened cheek, the frightened patients. He moved smoothly to Imani's side. carefully taking Nova into his arms. "You okay?" he asked quietly, noting the tremor in Imani's hands as she passed their daughter to him. "I will be," she whispered. "Take her outside. I'll handle this." Once Nova was safely in Ty's arms, Imani's demeanor shifted. She straightened her spine and reached for her messenger bag, pulling out her tablet with deliberate calm. The security guards exchanged uncertain glances as she began tapping through files. "Since you're so fond of documentation, Nurse Kincaid," Imani's voice carried clearly across the waiting room, "let's review some important paperwork." "You can save your complaints for the administration," Mara sneered. "Right now, you need to leave before we have you removed." "Actually," Imani turned her tablet around, displaying a legal document with prominent letterhead, "I believe you'll find that I am the administration." The young mother who had been recording leaned forward in her chair. Other patients set aside their magazines, the tension in the room shifting. "What are you talking about?" Mara's confidence wavered slightly. 3 days ago, CareLoop Healthcare Technologies completed its acquisition of Riverbridge Medical Group, including this birthing center. Imani swiped to display another document. "As CEO of CareLoop, that makes me your boss. Or rather, your former boss." The color drained from Mara's face. "You're lying. The board approved the merger last month. The paperwork was finalized on Tuesday." Imani's voice remained measured, but her eyes blazed. "Section 8.3 of the Employee Handbook covers emergency termination in cases of patient endangerment. Striking a mother holding an infant certainly qualifies." The security guards stepped back, their earlier certainty crumbling. The second nurse, who had been hovering behind Mara, slowly backed away toward the break room. "You can't just," Mara sputtered. "I can, and I am." Imani turned to address the security guards directly. "Please escort Nurse Kincaid off the premises immediately. She is no longer employed here, effective this moment." She looked around the waiting room. The same applies to all staff currently on duty who witnessed this assault and failed to intervene. A murmur rippled through the waiting room. One of the patients actually clapped before quickly stifling herself. "This is ridiculous." Mara grabbed her phone. "I'm calling Dr. Leland." "Doctor." "Leland no longer has authority here," Imani stated firmly. "And your access badges will be deactivated within the next 5 minutes. I suggest you gather your personal belongings quickly." The larger security guard cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we'll need to verify this with—" "Check your emails," Imani cut him off. "The management change notification went out this morning. Your security company contracts directly with CareLoop now." The guard pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly. His eyebrows shot up as he found the message. He showed it to his partner, who nodded grimly. "Ms. Kincaid." The guard turned to Mara, his tone now professional but cold. "Please come with us." "This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and—" Mara's voice rose hysterically. "I can, I have, and I did." Imani held up her tablet again. "Would you like me to read the specific clause that gives me this authority? Or would you prefer to leave with some dignity intact?" The young mother, who had been recording, stood up. "I have the whole thing on video. The assault, everything. Just in case anyone needs to see it." Mara's face contorted with rage and disbelief. She looked around the waiting room, but found no allies. The other staff members had already disappeared into the break room, presumably gathering their things. "This isn't over," Mara hissed as the security guards moved to flank her. "You're right," Imani agreed calmly. "The medical board will be very interested in reviewing your conduct. And those incident reports you've been writing? We'll be examining those very carefully." The security guards began escorting Mara toward the exit. Her heels no longer clicked with authority. They scraped against the floor as she stumbled, her composure finally breaking. Imani remained standing in the center of the waiting room, tablet in hand, as other staff members began filing out. Some shot her angry looks, others kept their eyes down, but all of them left. The young mother with the phone approached her. "That was amazing," she said quietly. "Do you want a copy of the video?" "Yes, please," Imani nodded. "Send it to this email." She wrote her address on a slip of paper, her hands finally steady. As the last of the terminated staff disappeared through the glass doors, an uneasy quiet settled over the waiting room. The remaining patients whispered among themselves, some still recording on their phones. Imani's shoulders remained straight, but exhaustion crept into her stance as the adrenaline began to fade. A petite nurse in blue scrubs approached from a side hallway, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Her name tag read Rosa Ortega, and unlike the others, her expression held concern rather than anger. "Ms. Caldwell?" Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Could I speak with you privately?" "Please." Imani studied the nurse's face, searching for any sign of hostility. Finding none, she nodded. "Let's use that consultation room." She gestured to a small office nearby, its door still ajar from the recent chaos. Once inside, Rosa closed the door carefully. Her hands trembled as she reached into her scrub pocket. "What happened to you today? It wasn't random. And it wasn't just about breastfeeding." "I had a feeling," Imani said, watching as Rosa withdrew a small flash drive. "I've been collecting evidence for months," Rosa explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Incident reports, patient complaints, internal memos, all buried or altered. They have a system here, especially with black mothers." She held out the drive. "They always make the mothers look crazy or unfit. You're not the first." Imani took the flash drive, its plastic casing warm from being carried close to Rosa's body. "How long has this been going on?" "Years. At least since I started here." Rosa wrung her hands. "They're careful about it. They use specific words in the charts: combative, non-compliant, unstable. Once those labels are in your medical record, they follow you everywhere." The weight of the tiny drive seemed to grow heavier in Imani's palm. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you have the power to do something about it." Rosa's eyes darted to the door. "And because what Mara did today, it wasn't just assault. It was part of a pattern. They provoke mothers until they react, then document the reaction as proof of instability." Imani's free hand moved unconsciously to her cheek, where the sting of Mara's slap still lingered. "They'll try to do that to me. They already are." Rosa pulled a folded paper from her other pocket. "Mara started writing her incident report before security even arrived. I made a copy." She smoothed out the paper on the small desk between them. Imani leaned forward to read, her jaw tightening at the words. "Patient displayed aggressive and erratic behavior. Refused to comply with safety protocols. Expressed paranoid beliefs about staff motives. Demonstrated poor judgment regarding infants' needs." "This is how it starts," Rosa said softly. "By the time most mothers realize what's happening, their charts are full of these notes. It affects custody hearings, CPS investigations, even routine pediatric visits at other facilities." Through the office window, Imani could see Ty in the parking lot, gently rocking Nova in his arms. The sight of her daughter made her chest tighten with both love and fear. "Why didn't anyone stop this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Who would believe us?" The few times someone complained, they were labeled disruptive and transferred or fired. Rosa's voice carried years of accumulated frustration. "Mara and Dr. Leland have connections everywhere. Other hospitals, licensing boards, even some judges." Imani slipped both the flash drive and the incident report into her bag. "Thank you for this, but aren't you worried about retaliation? They'll know you were here today. I submitted my resignation letter this morning. Rosa smiled sadly. "I have a position waiting at County General. But these mothers, they deserve better than what's happening here." A knock at the door made them both jump. One of the remaining security guards poked his head in. "Ms. Caldwell, the interim staff from other locations will be arriving within the hour. And your partner asked me to tell you that your daughter's starting to fuss." "Thank you." Imani nodded. She turned back to Rosa. "Would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you've seen?" "Yes," Rosa said without hesitation. "Everything on that drive, I can verify it all. Names, dates, altered documents, whatever you need." They exchanged contact information quickly. Rosa's movements still carrying that underlying tension of someone used to watching over her shoulder. "Be careful with those files," Rosa warned as they prepared to leave the office. "They're going to come at you hard when they realize what you have. And they'll use everything they can, including Nova, to discredit you." Imani's grip tightened on her bag. Let them try. The waiting room had mostly emptied, the remaining patients having been contacted to reschedule their appointments. Through the windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lobby floor. Imani felt the weight of the flash drive in her bag like a live coal, dangerous but vital. "Ms. Caldwell?" Rosa called softly as Imani reached the door. "There's something else you should know. The mothers who fought back, the ones who tried to expose this, most of them lost their children, at least temporarily. The system is rigged against us." Imani paused, her hand on the door handle. "Then it's time we change the system." She stepped out into the warm evening air, where Ty waited with Nova. Their daughter had fallen asleep, tiny fingers curled around her father's collar. Imani touched Nova's soft cheek, then pulled out her phone to call her legal team. The flash drive felt heavy in her bag, but her resolve was heavier. She had built her company by solving problems others claimed were impossible. Now she faced her greatest challenge, protecting her daughter while dismantling a system designed to silence mothers like her. The kitchen in Imani and Ty's modern townhouse was usually their sanctuary after long days. Tonight, the warm lighting and familiar surroundings did little to ease the tension in Imani's shoulders as she pushed food around her plate. "You've barely touched your dinner," Ty said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I keep thinking about what Rosa showed me." Imani set down her fork. "All those mothers, Ty. All those families torn apart because they dared to speak up." Nova dozed peacefully in her bassinet beside the table, tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Ty had insisted on cooking, his grandmother's recipe for comfort food, mac and cheese with crispy breadcrumbs. The gesture touched Imani, even if she couldn't muster an appetite. "We'll fight this," Ty assured her, his steady voice anchoring her racing thoughts. "You've got the evidence now. And unlike those other mothers, you have resources." Imani nodded, trying to draw strength from his words. She'd spent the drive home making calls to her legal team, to trusted board members, to community leaders who'd fought similar battles. The flash drive sat heavily in her laptop bag, waiting to reveal its secrets. "I just can't believe Mara actually—" Imani's words cut off at the sound of sharp knocks at their front door. Ty stood first, protective instinct kicking in. "I'll get it." "No." Imani rose too. "We face this together." The knocking came again, more insistent. Through the decorative glass panels flanking their door, Imani could make out two figures, one in what looked like a police uniform. Her heart rate spiked, but she kept her movements deliberate as she and Ty approached the door. Years of business negotiations had taught her to never show fear, even when her pulse was racing. Opening the door revealed a police officer, his badge catching the porch light, and a woman in business casual attire holding a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Caldwell?" the woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I'm Sandra Mitchell from Child Protective Services, and this is Officer Reynolds. We need to speak with you regarding an incident report filed this afternoon. Imani's jaw clenched, but her voice remained steady. It's Ms. Caldwell. Please come in. She gestured to their living room, exchanging a quick glance with Ty. The CPS worker settled into an armchair, while Officer Reynolds remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. The contrast between the cozy room, with its family photos and baby toys, and these unwelcome visitors felt jarring. We've received concerning reports about an altercation at Riverbridge Birthing Center, Mitchell began, flipping open her portfolio. The staff there documented some troubling behaviors. You mean after their charge nurse assaulted me while I was holding my infant daughter? Imani's tone was ice cold. Mitchell consulted her papers. According to the report, you exhibited aggressive and unstable behavior, refused to comply with safety protocols, and demonstrated concerning judgment regarding your child's needs. Rosa's warning echoed in Imani's mind. They always make the mothers look crazy or unfit. That's absolutely false, Ty interjected, his counselor's training evident in his controlled anger. I was there. The nurse attacked my partner while she was simply feeding our daughter. Sir, please. Officer Reynolds held up a hand. We need to hear from Ms. Caldwell directly. The implications hung heavy in the air. The assumption that Imani needed a man to speak for her. The dismissal of Ty's testimony. The subtle ways they were both being put in their place. Nova stirred in her bassinet, making small, fussy sounds. Imani moved to pick her up, hyper-aware of how Mitchell watched her every movement, probably making notes about her parenting. The report also mentions that you made threatening statements and attempted to interfere with hospital operations, Mitchell continued, her pen poised above her notepad. I exercised my legal authority as the managing partner of that facility to terminate staff who had created an unsafe environment. Imani corrected, keeping her voice level while soothing Nova. My company, Care Loop, acquired management rights to Riverbridge last month. Everything I did was within my contractual powers. Mitchell's pen paused. This detail clearly hadn't been in her report. Officer Reynolds shifted his weight, suddenly less certain of his role. Nevertheless, Mitchell pressed on, we have an obligation to investigate any claims of potential child endangerment. We'll need to conduct a welfare check on the infant. Imani held Nova closer, fighting the urge to refuse. She knew that any resistance would only feed into their narrative. Her name is Nova, she said firmly, and she's been under constant medical supervision since birth. Her pediatrician can provide full records. For the next 30 minutes, Imani and Ty endured a barrage of invasive questions. They watched as Mitchell examined Nova, checked their kitchen for adequate food, peered into the nursery, and documented everything in her little notebook. Every answer they gave was met with skepticism, every explanation treated as a potential lie. Finally, Mitchell closed her portfolio. We'll be following up with Nova's doctor and conducting additional interviews. You'll receive written notice of any findings within 5 business days. And if we have evidence of misconduct by the hospital staff? Imani asked, still cradling Nova. You can file a separate complaint through appropriate channels, Mitchell replied dismissively. For now, our concern is the child's welfare. After they left, Imani remained on the couch, gently rocking Nova while tears of fury and frustration threatened to spill. Everything Rosa had warned about was happening exactly as she'd predicted. The system wasn't just biased, it was weaponized, ready to turn any act of resistance into proof of unfitness. They didn't even ask about Mara slapping me, she said quietly, her voice tight with anger. They took her word over ours without question. Ty sat beside them, his arm protective around Imani's shoulders. Nova stirred slightly, then settled back to sleep, unaware of how quickly the world had turned against her mother. The retaliation took less than 6 hours, Imani whispered, pressing a kiss to Nova's forehead. They're not even trying to hide it. The morning sun filtered through the living room windows, casting long shadows across the scattered papers and laptops, covering Imani and Ty's coffee table. Dark circles under their eyes betrayed a mostly sleepless night, but determination kept them moving. Imani sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by legal documents and hospital policies. Her tablet displayed a growing list of allies and resources: community leaders, medical rights attorneys, parent advocacy groups. Ty worked nearby on his laptop, methodically documenting every detail of yesterday's confrontation while it was still fresh. Nova slept in her swing, undisturbed by the quiet rustling of papers and soft tapping of keyboards. The peaceful rise and fall of her tiny chest was a stark contrast to the battle plans forming around her. 3 sharp knocks at the door made them both look up. Ty moved to answer it, returning with Pastor Evelyn Brooks. Despite her 71 years, she carried herself with the strength and purpose of someone half her age. "Child," she said, embracing Imani tightly. "Rosa called me last night. Told me everything." Imani melted into the hug, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability she rarely showed outside her closest circle. Pastor Evelyn had been a fixture in their community for decades, first as a midwife and later as a spiritual leader. Her presence alone felt like reinforcement arriving. "They're trying to paint me as unstable," Imani said, pulling back from the embrace. "CPS was here last night. They're acting like I'm the threat, not the nurse who slapped me." Pastor Evelyn's eyes flashed with recognition. She settled into an armchair, her weathered hands smoothing her skirt, a gesture Imani had seen countless times before difficult conversations. "Ain't nothing new about what they're doing," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of similar stories. "I delivered babies for 30 years in this city. Watched them write lies into Black Mothers' charts all that time. Aggressive, non-compliant, unstable. Same words, different decades." Ty brought coffee for everyone, setting the mugs on the only clear corner of the table. "But they can't just make up accusations," he said. "There have to be consequences." "Oh, there will be," Pastor Evelyn replied, reaching for her coffee. "But you can't fight this with anger alone, Imani. That's what they want. Every time you raise your voice, they'll write it down as proof. Every time you demand justice, they'll call it aggression." Imani nodded, reaching for the laptop containing Rosa's flash drive. "Rosa showed me some of it already, but I haven't had time to really dig in." "Then let's see what we're dealing with," Pastor Evelyn said, moving to sit closer. For the next hour, they combed through the files. Rosa had been thorough, organizing years of incident reports, patient complaints, and internal communications. Patterns emerged quickly. Language repeated across different cases, specific phrases used to flag certain patients for extra scrutiny. "Look at this," Imani said, turning the screen. 3 different reports from last year, all using exactly the same wording. Patient exhibited hostile and erratic behavior when questioned about childcare practices. Ty leaned in, his counselor's training kicking in. "That's not natural documentation. Those are pre-written templates." "Mm-hmm," Pastor Evelyn hummed, her expression grim. "And look who they're using them on. Every single one. A Black or brown mother who questioned their treatment." Imani opened another file, her hands shaking slightly. "Here's one from 2 months ago. Mother became confrontational when asked to follow proper feeding protocols. That's almost word for word what they wrote about me." "Because it ain't about what really happened," Pastor Evelyn said. "It's about what they can make stick. They've got a whole system for turning any resistance into proof that we're unfit." Nova stirred in her swing, making small noises that usually preceded waking. Ty moved to get her before she could fully cry, lifting her with practiced gentleness. "They're counting on you to react emotionally. Pastor Evelyn continued, watching as Ty soothed Nova. Want you to get angry, get loud, give them more ammunition? But that's not how we win this fight. Then how do we fight it? Imani asked, her voice tight with controlled frustration. We burn their paper trail, Pastor Evelyn said firmly. Every template, every recycled phrase, every pattern they've used to destroy families. We expose it all. Make them read their own lies out loud until nobody can ignore what they've been doing. Imani looked at the files spread around them, seeing them with new clarity. Rosa said there are more nurses willing to speak up, and I've got access to the full hospital records now through CareLoop's acquisition. Good, Pastor Evelyn nodded. But we need more. Every mother they've labeled unfit, every family they've torn apart, their stories need to be heard. And we need to move fast before they can bury the evidence. Ty returned to the group, Nova now awake and curious in his arms. I can reach out to some of my veteran support groups, he offered. Several of them have been fighting similar battles with the VA medical system. Pastor Evelyn reached for her phone. I'll call Sister Jenkins at First Baptist. Her daughter's a medical records specialist. And Reverend Martinez over at San Lucas. His congregation's been documenting cases like this for years. Imani watched as Nova grabbed at Ty's fingers, completely unaware of the forces gathering to protect her future. The sight of her daughter's innocent trust made something fierce and unshakable settle in her chest. Looking at Nova, Imani's voice was quiet, but steel strong. They won't do this to you. They won't do this to us. The afternoon sun beat down on the nearly empty cafe parking lot as Ty waited in his car, air conditioning running against the heat. He checked his watch again. 12:53. Rosa had insisted on meeting away from the hospital, somewhere they wouldn't be noticed. A silver Honda pulled in 2 spots away. Rosa stepped out, clutching a thick manila envelope to her chest. She looked around nervously before walking to Ty's car and sliding into the passenger seat. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had to wait until Mara was in meetings to access these files. Ty nodded, keeping his voice calm and steady, the same tone he used with anxious veterans. You're doing the right thing, Rosa. We'll make sure you're protected. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. These are the staff training logs from the last 3 years. Mara's supposed to certify that everyone completes mandatory cultural sensitivity and patient care updates. She pulled out a stack of papers. But look at the signatures. Ty spread the documents on his lap, page after page of nearly identical signatures, the dates too perfectly spaced. They're photocopied, he said, studying the repeated patterns. Exactly. Rosa pointed to specific entries. She hasn't actually done the training sessions in over 2 years. Just keeps copying old sign-in sheets, changing the dates. Half the staff isn't even properly certified anymore. Ty carefully photographed each page with his phone, making sure to capture the suspicious signature patterns. This proves systematic negligence. Have you shown these to anyone else? No, Rosa's phone buzzed, making her jump. She checked it quickly. I need to get back. Mara's meeting is ending early. Wait, Ty said, as she reached for the door. We can help you if they retaliate. Pastor Evelyn has lawyers ready. Rosa paused, then pulled a small notebook from her purse. Here's my personal number. And there's a high school student, Jasmine, who volunteers in the waiting room. She saw everything yesterday. She wants to help. Back at home, Ty found Imani at the dining table, surrounded by even more documents than that morning. Nova napped in her carrier nearby. You need to see these, he said, pulling up the photos of the training logs. Rosa found proof Mara's been falsifying mandatory certifications. Imani leaned in, studying the images. This is huge. Without proper certification, every procedure they've done could be challenged. She reached for her phone as it buzzed with a text. Hold on. I'm getting a message from someone named Jasmine? That's the volunteer Rosa mentioned. She witnessed everything yesterday. Imani read the message aloud. Mrs. Caldwell, I was working the front desk when Nurse Kincaid slapped you. What she did was wrong. I have it all written down in my volunteer log, and I took a video with my phone. I want to help. A video? Ty's eyebrows shot up. That changes everything. She's 17. She'll need parental permission to testify. Imani was already typing a response. But an unbiased witness, especially with video evidence. That's not all, Ty said, opening his laptop. I've been tracing that CPS tip. The report came through their anonymous hotline, but the IP address matches Riverbridge's administrative wing, specifically Gavin Price's office. Their PR strategist? Imani's fingers stopped moving over her phone. The one who's been planting those vague statements about a disruptive visitor in the media. The same. He's got a history of this, too. Ty turned the screen to show her. 3 years ago, he handled crisis management for a pharmaceutical company accused of discriminatory drug trials. Every whistleblower suddenly faced personal scandals, custody battles, professional complaints. Imani stood up and began pacing, her mind racing. So it's not just Mara. The whole system is designed to silence people, first through direct intimidation, then through official channels, when that doesn't work. She returned to the table, spreading out everything they'd gathered. Rosa's flash drive files, the falsified training logs, screenshots of Gavin's media manipulation, Jasmine's text message, proof of a pattern bigger than one angry nurse or one violent incident. We've got them, she said softly, running her finger along a particularly damning document. Falsified records, witness testimony, video evidence, proof of coordinated retaliation. She looked at Nova, still peacefully sleeping. They can't brush this under the rug. What's our next move? Ty asked, already knowing Imani would have a plan forming. We need to... A notification popped up on Imani's tablet. An email from Jasmine with the video attachment. They huddled together to watch it. The footage was slightly shaky but clear. Mara's aggressive approach, her grab for Nova, the shocking impact of her hand across Imani's face. Most tellingly, the immediate shift in security's response, moving to contain Imani rather than address Mara's violence. Send this to our lawyers, Ty said, and Pastor Evelyn's contact at the medical board. Imani was already forwarding the video, her movements precise and focused. Each new piece of evidence felt like another brick in the foundation of truth they were building. After days of feeling attacked and defensive, they were finally gathering the tools to fight back. She looked at the growing pile of proof before her, tangible documentation of injustice that could no longer be dismissed as one mother's complaint. The system's own paperwork, turned against itself. Witness testimony from an unexpected ally. Technical evidence tracing the retaliation to its source. Nova stirred in her carrier, making small, snuffling sounds. Imani reached over to adjust her blanket, her touch gentle despite the strength in her voice. We've got them, baby girl. We've got them. The wooden pews of Greater Hope Baptist Church filled quickly that evening. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old hymnals hung in the air as people crowded in, many filming with their phones. Beneath the stained glass windows, Imani sat beside Pastor Evelyn at a long table draped in dark blue cloth. 3 microphones were set up in the center aisle. We're here tonight, Pastor Evelyn began, her voice carrying decades of authority, to speak truth to power, to bring into the light what's been hidden in medical charts and whispered in hospital corridors. Imani surveyed the crowd, mothers with babies, elderly women who'd seen this fight before, young activists with laptops open to live stream. Nova slept peacefully in Ty's arms near the front row. The first speaker approached the microphone, a young mother carrying a toddler. "My name is Keisha Thompson," she said, voice shaking slightly. "Last year, I questioned why they weren't monitoring my blood pressure properly. The nurse wrote in my chart that I was combative and displaying unstable behavior. When my son was born, they called CPS, claiming I seemed erratic." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the church. Pastor Evelyn nodded encouragingly. "They investigated me for 2 months," Keisha continued, holding her son tighter. "All because I stood up for my own health." Another mother took her place. "Michelle Wilson. They labeled me non-compliant for refusing an unnecessary C-section. The doctor wrote that I was hostile to medical advice when I asked about alternatives." She wiped tears from her eyes. "That label followed me to every appointment after." The stories kept coming. A mother branded negligent for questioning vaccine scheduling. Another deemed aggressive for requesting a different nurse. Each account echoed with familiar phrases, the same words Imani had seen in Rosa's files, repeated across decades of patient records. "They made me feel crazy," said a woman in her 50s, gripping the microphone stand. "Like maybe I was imagining the dismissal, the condescension. But seeing these patterns now, they were gaslighting us all." Patricia Henderson, a retired white nurse who'd worked at 3 local hospitals, approached the microphone slowly. The room hushed. "I need to speak to what I witnessed over 30 years of nursing," she said, her lined face solemn. "This labeling system, it was taught to us, though never in writing. We were encouraged to note difficult patients in specific ways. And yes, these terms were used disproportionately for Black mothers." She pulled out old notebooks. "I kept records because it didn't sit right with me. The same phrases over and over: confrontational demeanor, resistant to care, emotional instability. Code words that marked these women as troublemakers for doing what any mother would do: advocate for their children." The live stream comment section exploded. Local news crews who'd been filming discreetly from the back started moving closer. A young resident physician stood up next. "We're still being taught these patterns in subtle ways," she admitted. "How to document problem patients without using obvious racial language. How to protect ourselves legally while discrediting their complaints." Pastor Evelyn's steady gaze swept the room. "How many here have been labeled unfit or unstable in their medical records?" Nearly half the hands went up. How many had CPS called on them after speaking up at the hospital? Most of those hands stayed raised. Imani approached the microphone, Nova's hospital bracelet still on her wrist. The room fell silent. "What happened to me wasn't a single incident," she said clearly. "It wasn't one angry nurse or one bad day. It was part of a system designed to silence us, to make us doubt ourselves, to paint us as unstable when we're simply being mothers." She held up a thick stack of papers. "These are the incident reports from Riverbridge. The same phrases, copied and pasted year after year. The same tactics used to discredit Black mothers who dare to question their care. The church's old walls seemed to vibrate with years of stored pain finally finding voice. Some women were crying openly now, holding each other. "But we have something they didn't expect," Imani continued. "We have proof. We have witnesses. We have their own documentation of systematic discrimination. And most importantly, we have each other." She turned to face the cameras directly. "To every mother who's been called angry for protecting her child, difficult for asking questions, unfit for demanding respect, you are not alone. We are not crazy, and we will not be silent anymore." The first clap came from the back, then another, building like a wave until the entire church thundered with applause. Women stood, raising their fists, their phones, their babies. The live stream counters ticked up into the thousands. Pastor Evelyn stepped forward, taking Imani's hand. "This is just the beginning," she announced over the noise. "We're creating a database to track these incidents. We're filing a class action lawsuit. We're demanding oversight of medical records and incident reports." Looking out at the sea of determined faces, Imani felt something shift in her chest. The isolation of the past few days melted away. She wasn't just one mother fighting anymore. She was part of an army of women who'd faced the same battle, who understood exactly what she was up against. They kept clapping, some shouting, "Amen!" and "Speak truth." The energy in the room was electric. Years of suppressed stories finally breaking free. Ty brought Nova to her, and Imani held her daughter close, surrounded by the strength of her community. The applause rolled on, a thunder of support that seemed to shake loose decades of silence. The church doors creaked open mid-testimony. Two figures in dark suits walked purposefully down the center aisle, badges glinting under the overhead lights. The crowd fell silent as Tom Haskins and Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services approached the front. Imani's heart dropped. She recognized Haskins from his visit to her home the previous night. His face was grim, professional, but there was something apologetic in his eyes. "Ms. Caldwell," he said into the nearest microphone, his voice echoing through the now silent church. "We need to conduct an immediate wellness check on Nova." The live stream chat exploded. Phones raised higher, recording every moment. "Are you serious?" Pastor Evelyn stepped forward, her usual calm cracking. "This child is perfectly fine, being cared for by both parents, surrounded by community." "We received multiple urgent reports," Chen explained, pulling out a tablet. "Allegations of erratic behavior and potential endangerment during a public gathering." Imani's hands gripped the edge of the table. The timing was too perfect. Someone had called CPS the moment the forum started trending online. She looked at Ty, who held Nova protectively against his chest, their daughter sleeping peacefully through it all. "This is harassment," someone shouted from the crowd. "We're recording everything," called another voice. Haskins cleared his throat. "Ms. Caldwell, we can do this privately in a side room or—" "No," Imani said firmly, standing straighter. "You want to check my baby's welfare? Do it right here, in front of all these witnesses and cameras. Let everyone see exactly how the system works." She nodded to Ty, who approached slowly. The crowd parted like a sea, phones following his every move. Nova stirred slightly as Ty handed her to Chen, who began the standard physical check. Imani felt her chest tighten as strange hands moved over her daughter. She watched Chen check Nova's temperature, examine her skin for marks, test her reflexes. Every second felt like an hour. Comments scrolled rapidly across the live stream. CPS investigating CEO mom during community meeting. Watch them take that baby away. Who calls child services during a church meeting? Pastor Evelyn gripped Imani's hand tight enough to hurt. The older woman's face was a mask of controlled fury. She'd seen this scene play out too many times before. "Normal temperature," Chen announced professionally. "Good muscle tone, no signs of distress or neglect. Appropriate weight for age." "The baby is perfectly healthy," Haskins concluded. But the damage was done. The clip of Imani's child being inspected by CPS would live forever online, feeding into every stereotype they were fighting against. Chen handed Nova back to Ty. The baby had started to fuss, sensing the tension in the room. Imani wanted desperately to take her daughter, to hold her close, but she forced herself to stay at the microphone. "Let the record show," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall, "that this is the second CPS check in 24 hours, both based on anonymous tips, both occurring exactly when we started speaking out." The crowd stood, voices rising in support. "We see you, sister! Stay strong! This is what we're fighting." Haskins paused at the door, turning back briefly. "Ms. Caldwell, for what it's worth, we're required to respond to every report. But I want you to know I see what's happening here." After they left, the energy in the room shifted from shock to outrage. Patricia Henderson, the retired nurse, grabbed a microphone. "I watched them do this for 30 years, she said fiercely. "Call CPS on mothers who complained, who questioned, who stood up. It's their favorite weapon. Use the system meant to protect children to traumatize families instead." Keisha Thompson bounced her toddler as she spoke up. "They did the same to me. Called CPS right after I filed a formal complaint. Made me look unstable." But Imani could barely hear them over the roar of blood in her ears. On her phone, notifications poured in. The clips were already spreading. Breaking: Tech CEO's baby investigated during public forum. CPS conducts emergency welfare. Check on infant at church meeting. Questions raised about CEO mother's stability after multiple CPS visits. She watched the view counts climb, saw the comments roll in questioning her judgment, her parenting, her mental state. Everything she'd built, her reputation, her credibility, all being undermined in real time. The crowd began to chant, "We believe you! We believe you!" Pastor Evelyn took the microphone. "This is what systemic racism looks like in action, folks. This is how they try to silence us. But we are not going anywhere." More voices joined the chant. Some people were on their feet, swaying. The church felt electric with righteous anger. But Imani stood frozen behind the table, watching her daughter in Ty's arms, seeing the social media storm grow. She'd known they would retaliate. She'd expected pushback. But this, using her baby, her motherhood, her deepest vulnerability as a weapon against her, it cut deeper than she'd imagined possible. The chanting grew louder, surrounding her with support. But Imani felt oddly distant from it all. She watched the live stream numbers tick up, saw her name trending, and realized with crystal clarity this was only the beginning of their fight. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Imani sat beside her lawyer, Sarah Washington. Nova slept peacefully in her carrier, tiny fingers curled into fists. The public gallery was packed. Mothers from the forum, community members, even a few nurses who'd quit Riverbridge years ago. Judge Martinez adjusted her glasses, reviewing the emergency injunction. "We're here to determine management authority over Riverbridge Birthing Center following recent events. Let's proceed." Mara Kincaid sat at the defendant's table, ramrod straight in her white uniform. Dr. Leland slouched beside her, looking irritated at the proceedings. Their lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Phillips, shuffled papers importantly. Sarah stood, her voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, we'll demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory practices, falsified records, and direct physical assault against my client, the legal owner of this facility." She gestured to the court officer, who wheeled in a cart loaded with documents. "First, we present Exhibit A, over 50 incident reports spanning 5 years. Note the identical language used to describe black and brown mothers: aggressive, non-compliant, unstable." The judge leaned forward, examining the highlighted sections. Phillips jumped up. "Objection! These documents are confidential medical records, which my client has full authority to access as the facility's owner," Sarah countered smoothly. "And they show clear evidence of systemic bias." Judge Martinez nodded. "Overruled. Continue." Sarah clicked through a presentation. Here we see Nurse Kincaid's incident report about Ms. Caldwell, filed minutes after being terminated. Compare it to these previous reports about other black mothers. The similarities were stunning. Same phrases, same accusations, Same implications of mental instability and neglect. Now, Your Honor, we call our first witness, Rosa Ortega. Rosa walked to the stand, hands clasped tightly. She'd worn her nurse's uniform despite being suspended. Under oath, she described years of watching discrimination unfold. They had a system, she explained. Any mother who complained or questioned treatment, especially black mothers, would get flagged in their chart. Then came the incident reports, the calls to CPS. Objection! Phillips stood again. Hearsay. Overruled, Judge Martinez said firmly. Continue, Ms. Ortega. Rosa held up a thick folder. These are training logs I maintained as staff educator. They show Nurse Kincaid falsified certification dates for multiple nurses, then used those false credentials to justify overruling patient requests. Mara's face turned red. Dr. Leland whispered urgently to Phillips. Next came Ashley Martinez, the teenage volunteer. She nervously twisted her hospital ID badge as she described the waiting room incident. Ms. Caldwell was just feeding her baby. Nurse Kincaid got mad and tried to grab the baby. Then Ashley swallowed hard. She slapped Ms. Caldwell across the face. I saw it clearly. I was standing right there. The gallery murmured. Judge Martinez tapped her gavel once. Tom Haskins testified next, his CPS badge gleaming. We investigated the anonymous tips about Ms. Caldwell and found no evidence of neglect or instability. Further investigation revealed the tips came from a PR firm contracted by Riverbridge. Phillips tried desperately to object, but the evidence kept mounting. More nurses testified, more documents emerged. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Finally, Sarah played the security footage from the waiting room. The slap was clearly visible. Several people in the gallery gasped. Your Honor, Sarah concluded, my client legally owns this facility. She witnessed abuse, experienced assault, and uncovered systematic discrimination. She had every right to terminate employees who violated patient safety and ethical standards. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, studying the courtroom. The silence felt heavy. Mr. Phillips, your response? Phillips stood, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, while we regret any misunderstandings, Ms. Caldwell's hostile takeover of our facility has disrupted patient care. We ask the court to— Hostile takeover? Judge Martinez interrupted. Counselor, I'm looking at acquisition documents signed 3 months ago. This was a standard business transaction. She shuffled through papers on her bench. I'm also looking at dozens of discriminatory incidents, falsified records, and witness testimony of physical assault. She set the papers down firmly. Mr. Phillips, do you have any evidence to counter these specific charges? Phillips glanced at Dr. Leland, then back at his notes. Well, Your Honor, regarding hospital policy, I'll take that as a no. Judge Martinez straightened in her chair. Having reviewed all evidence presented, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Caldwell's ownership and management authority over Riverbridge Birthing Center is affirmed. Her termination of staff members involved in discriminatory practices and assault is upheld. The gallery erupted in cheers. Judge Martinez banged her gavel. Furthermore, she continued once order was restored, I'm referring evidence of falsified medical records to the State Nursing Board for review. This court stands adjourned. The bang of the gavel was almost lost in the crowd's reaction. People hugged and cried. Pastor Evelyn raised her hands in prayer. Rosa wiped tears from her eyes. Imani stood slowly, lifting Nova from her carrier. Her daughter blinked awake, yawning widely at all the noise. Ty appeared at her side, wrapping an arm around them both. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps with cameras and microphones. But Imani barely heard their questions. She held Nova high, letting the spring sunlight warm her daughter's face. For this moment, just this one shining moment, everything felt right. Miss Caldwell, what's your response to the ruling? Will you reinstate any of the terminated staff? What changes do you plan to make at Riverbridge? The questions flew at her, but Imani just smiled, holding Nova close. She had won. They had won. Imani and Ty sat in their kitchen that evening, takeout containers spread across the counter. Nova dozed in her swing nearby while they savored their small victory. The warm glow of triumph still lingered from the courthouse steps. "To justice," Ty said, raising his water glass. His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "To new beginnings," Imani added, clinking her glass against his. She felt lighter than she had in days. "I can't wait to start making real changes at Riverbridge. First thing tomorrow." Her phone buzzed, then Ty's. Then both their tablets lit up with news alerts. Imani grabbed her phone, her stomach dropping as she read the headline. "Breaking. Emergency TRO reinstates Riverbridge staff. Blocks CEO's actions." "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Ty leaned over her shoulder, reading aloud. "Late this evening, attorneys for Riverbridge Hospital System secured a temporary restraining order from Judge William Bedford, blocking recent terminations and reinstating all staff pending arbitration. Dr. Arthur Leland cited grave concerns about continuity of care in the emergency filing. Imani's hands shook as she scrolled through the article. "Judge Bedford? He's not even in our district. How did they—" She stopped, remembering something Rosa had mentioned. "Wait, Bedford. He's connected to Gavin Price somehow. The PR guy?" Ty frowned. "The one who filed those false CPS reports? They're all connected." Imani pressed her palms against her temples. "The whole system is rigged." She jumped up, pacing the kitchen. "We have to fight this. I'll call Sarah. We'll file an emergency appeal." "Tonight?" Ty glanced at the clock, showing nearly midnight. "Baby, we need to think strategically. Get some rest and hit this fresh in the morning." Imani wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her bones. She looked at Nova, peaceful in her swing, and nodded reluctantly. "First thing tomorrow, then. We'll go to the hospital, document everything before Mara and her crew can get back in." They tried to sleep, but Imani tossed and turned, her mind racing with possibilities. Around dawn, she gave up and started getting ready. Ty insisted on taking Nova so Imani could focus on gathering evidence. "I'll meet you there," he said, buckling Nova into her car seat. "Just going to stop by Pastor Evelyn's first. She wanted to see the baby anyway." Imani kissed them both goodbye, then headed to her office to collect documents. 20 minutes later, her phone rang. Ty's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, I'm almost done here. They pulled me over." Ty's voice was tight, controlled. "Some tip about erratic driving and child endangerment. They're keeping us here. Won't let me reach Nova's diaper bag with her medicine." "Where are you?" Imani was already running to her car. "Martin Luther King Boulevard, just past the church." "Imani?" She's starting to wheeze. Imani's heart stopped. Nova had been diagnosed with mild respiratory issues at birth. She needed her preventive inhaler regularly. "I'm coming. Call 911 right now. I don't care what the police say." She broke speed limits getting there, finding 3 police cars with flashing lights surrounding Ty's SUV. Nova's cries carried through the morning air. "That's my baby!" Imani screamed, running toward them. 2 officers blocked her path. "She needs her medicine." "Ma'am, stay back. I'm her mother. She has respiratory problems." Imani could see Ty standing by his open door, hands visible, face twisted with worry as Nova's cries grew weaker. Finally, paramedics arrived. Imani broke through the police line as they reached Nova, whose lips had taken on a bluish tinge. The paramedics quickly assessed her, administered oxygen, and cleared her airways. "She's stabilizing," one paramedic assured them. "But she should be checked at the hospital." "Not Riverbridge," Imani said immediately. "Take her to Metro General." Hours later, after Nova had been cleared and released, they returned home. Imani hadn't spoken a word since leaving the hospital. She carried Nova to the nursery, changed her, fed her, and laid her in the crib with mechanical precision. Then she walked to their bedroom and collapsed. The sobs came from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Ty's arms wrapped around her as she shook. "They'll never stop," she choked out. "They'll never stop coming after us, after her." "Shh," Ty murmured, rocking her gently. They could have killed her. Over what? Over their pride? Their power? Imani's voice cracked. "I did everything right. I went to school, built a company, played by their rules. And they still... She couldn't finish. The image of Nova struggling to breathe played over and over in her mind. The police blocking access to life-saving medicine. The clinical way the paramedics had described how close it had been. "What if we hadn't gotten there in time?" she whispered. "What if—" "Don't!" Ty's voice was firm. "Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. Nova's safe. We're together." But Imani couldn't stop shaking. "They'll never stop," she repeated. "The system, the corruption, all of it. They'll use anything. Police, courts, medical records. They'll paint me as angry, as unstable, as unfit. They'll hurt my baby to hurt me." Ty held her tighter as she sobbed, her tears soaking his shirt. Outside their window, the sun climbed higher in the sky, oblivious to the broken woman weeping in her husband's arms, mourning not just today's terror, but generations of mothers who had faced the same systemic violence. "They'll never stop," she whispered one final time, her voice hollow with exhaustion and despair. The doorbell chimed as evening shadows crept across Imani's living room. She hadn't moved from the couch since her breakdown, staring blankly at the wall while Ty tended to Nova. Her eyes felt swollen, her throat raw. "Baby, Pastor Evelyn's here," Ty called softly from the entryway. Imani didn't respond, but heard the familiar tap of Pastor Evelyn's cane on their hardwood floor. The elderly woman's presence filled the room before she even spoke. "Child," Pastor Evelyn said, lowering herself into an armchair. "Look at me." Imani reluctantly met her gaze. Pastor Evelyn's eyes held both steel and tenderness, the look of someone who had weathered countless storms. "They almost—" Imani's voice cracked. "Nova could have." "But she didn't," Pastor Evelyn cut in firmly. "She's right there, sleeping peaceful as can be." She nodded toward the baby monitor, where Nova's steady breathing could be heard. "Now, are you done feeling sorry for yourself?" The words stung, but Imani recognized the tough love in them. Pastor Evelyn hadn't survived decades of fighting medical racism by wallowing. "They have all the power," Imani whispered. "The courts, the police, everything." Pastor Evelyn scoffed. "Child, please, you think we didn't face worse? You think we didn't have crosses burned on our lawns for daring to demand basic dignity?" She leaned forward. "The power isn't in their systems. It's in their secrets. And you've got those now, don't you?" A knock at the door interrupted them. Ty opened it to reveal Rosa, clutching her purse tightly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but determined. "I brought something else," Rosa said without preamble, pulling out a thick folder. "Training logs. Every nurse has to maintain current certifications. Mara's been falsifying them for years." Imani sat up straighter as Rosa spread the documents across their coffee table. "See these signatures? Mara signed off on training that never happened. She cut corners to save money, then covered it up. And these dates here? She backdated everything after inspections were announced." "This is criminal negligence," Ty said. examining the papers. More than that, Pastor Evelyn added, it's proof of a pattern. She didn't just abuse her power once. She built a whole system of lies. Another knock made them all jump. This time, Tom Haskins stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his CPS blazer. "Mr. Haskins?" Imani tensed. "May I come in?" he asked formally. When Ty nodded, he entered but remained standing. "I need to tell you something. Off the record." He pulled out his phone, showing them an email chain. "The tips about your family came directly from Gavin Price. He used multiple dummy accounts, but they all trace back to his IP address. He coordinated with local police to arrange that traffic stop." Imani's hands clenched. "Can you testify to that?" "I will," Haskins said firmly. "I've spent 20 years trying to protect children. What they did today, using my office as a weapon, endangering your daughter for political games, that's not protection. That's abuse of power." Pastor Evelyn nodded approvingly. "Now you're seeing it clear, Mr. Haskins." "They need to say it," Imani murmured, an idea forming. "All of it." "What's that, child?" "You said their power is in their secrets." Imani stood up, energy returning to her limbs. "So we make them read their lies out loud. Every false report, every faked signature, every racist complaint. Make them speak their shame in public." Rosa's eyes widened. "The board meeting. It's mandatory after a TRO, and it has to be public." "Exactly." Imani began pacing, her mind racing. "We bring every mother they've wronged. We show every document. We make them face what they've done, not in private meetings, not in sealed records, but in front of everyone." "They'll try to stop you," Haskins warned. "Let them try." Pastor Evelyn's voice carried decades of defiance. "Truth has a way of being heard." Ty wrapped his arm around Imani's shoulders. "What do you need from us?" "Rosa, can you get the affected mothers to testify?" Rosa nodded. "Many were at the forum. They're ready." "Mr. Haskins, your evidence about Gavin Price?" "I'll have it documented and ready." "Pastor Evelyn?" Imani turned to the elderly woman. "Will you help me prepare? You know better than anyone how to make power face its crimes." "Child," Pastor Evelyn smiled, "I've been waiting decades to see this day." Imani walked to Nova's room, gazing down at her sleeping daughter. The anger and fear that had paralyzed her earlier transformed into something else, something focused and fierce. She touched Nova's cheek gently, then returned to the living room where her allies waited. For the first time since the traffic stop, her voice held no trace of tears. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "they face me." Rosa spread out more documents. Haskins pulled up emails on his laptop, and Pastor Evelyn began sharing her decades of experience fighting systemic racism. Together, they worked late into the night, building their case piece by piece, preparing to force a broken system to confront its own reflection. The Riverbridge Hospital boardroom buzzed with tension. Every seat in the auditorium was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. News cameras lined the back, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Imani sat at the witness table, her spine straight as steel. Nova dozed peacefully in Ty's arms in the front row, while Pastor Evelyn sat beside them, her cane planted firmly on the floor. Dr. Leland presided over the board with practiced calm, but his fingers drummed restlessly on the polished wood. "This emergency session will come to order," he announced, his voice carrying through the speakers. "We're here to address recent disruptions at our birthing center." Imani's lawyer stood. "My client would like to present evidence of systematic discrimination and negligence." "Very well." Dr. Leland's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Proceed." The first witness approached the microphone, a young black mother holding a toddler. Her voice shook but grew stronger as she spoke. 2 years ago, I questioned my treatment here. The next day, my chart said I was hostile and potentially unstable. They called CPS on me for asking questions about my own care. Another mother followed, then another. Each story echoed the same pattern. Questions met with accusations, concerns dismissed as aggression, medical records weaponized against them. The audience murmured with growing outrage. Mara shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Rosa approached the podium next, carrying a thick folder. "These are staff training logs from the past 5 years," Rosa said, her voice clear despite her trembling hands. Nurse Kincaid falsified certification dates, forged signatures, and backdated documents to cover up missed trainings. She projected scanned pages onto the screen. Here, she signed off on emergency response training that never happened. Here, she backdated CPR certifications before an inspection. Every signature matches her handwriting. Mara's face reddened. "Those records are confidential. They're evidence," Rosa cut in, "of negligence that put patients at risk." Tom Haskins took the stand next, adjusting his CPS badge. "I investigated the claims against Ms. Caldwell and her family. Every tip was traced to dummy accounts created by Gavin Price, the hospital's PR strategist. He displayed email chains and IP traces. He orchestrated false reports to trigger investigations, then coordinated with local police to manufacture incidents." Gavin Price stood up, straightening his tie. "These are baseless accusations. They're documented facts," Haskins interrupted, "and I've submitted them to the district attorney's office." The teenage volunteer who'd witnessed Imani's assault spoke next, her voice small but steady. "I saw Nurse Kincaid slap Ms. Caldwell while she was holding her baby. Then she lied about it in her report, saying Ms. Caldwell was the aggressor." A forensics expert presented his analysis, highlighting identical phrases used across dozens of patient complaints. These reports show clear evidence of templated language, specifically targeting women of color who questioned their care. The crowd grew louder with each revelation. "Doctor?" Leland repeatedly called for order, his composure cracking. Imani's lawyer stood again. "We have one final piece of evidence." She projected documents showing financial ties between the judge who issued the TRO and Gavin Price's consulting firm. The restraining order was obtained through undisclosed conflicts of interest. Dr. Leland's face had gone ashen. "These allegations are all documented," Imani said, rising from her seat. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. "Article 7 of my management contract includes a morals clause. It requires immediate termination of any staff member who endangers patients or engages in discriminatory practices." She turned to face the board directly. "You have a choice. Vote to remove Nurse Kincaid and accept Dr. Leland's resignation, or I will take this evidence public and sue for breach of contract." Mara jumped up. "You can't—" "Sit down," one of the board members snapped. "We've heard enough." The board's vote was quick and decisive. Mara's termination was immediate, her case referred to the nursing board for review. Dr. Leland's removal followed, his face rigid with fury as he gathered his papers. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Mara stormed toward the exit, her shoes clicking sharply on the floor. Dr. Leland followed, not meeting anyone's eyes. Gavin Price slipped out a side door, already on his phone. Imani walked to where Ty stood with Nova. Tears streamed down her face as she lifted their daughter high, the audience's applause washing over them. Pastor Evelyn beamed from her seat, while Rosa wiped her eyes nearby. Mothers from the audience approached Imani, some crying, others smiling through tears. They reached out to touch her shoulders, her hands, offering quiet thank yous. Their victory wasn't just about one incident or one nurse. It was about breaking a system that had silenced them for generations. The news cameras captured it all: the triumph, the tears, the solidarity of a community that had finally forced truth into the light. Outside the boardroom windows, the afternoon sun painted the walls golden, as if highlighting the change that had just swept through Riverbridge's halls. The headlines scrolled across TV screens and news websites. Riverbridge Hospital nurse faces license review. PR executive under criminal investigation. Hospital board chair steps down amid scandal. Each new development sent ripples through the medical community. In her office at CareLoop, Imani watched the coverage with mixed emotions. Nova lay contentedly in her carrier beside the desk, cooing at a small stuffed giraffe. The past few days had been a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and planning sessions. The licensing board wants to review every complaint filed under Mara's supervision, Tai said, setting down a fresh cup of tea on Imani's desk. They're going back 5 years, Imani nodded, scrolling through her emails. Good. And Gavin Price? 3 different agencies investigating him now. The DA's office is particularly interested in those falsified CPS reports. The door opened, and Pastor Evelyn entered with Rosa, both carrying thick folders. Despite her cane, Evelyn moved with renewed energy these days. The Community Council finished their recommendations, Evelyn announced, easing into a chair. 23 members, representing every major demographic in our service area. They're ready to start oversight next week. Rosa spread out several documents. I've drafted new training protocols focusing on cultural competency and bias recognition. Every staff member will need to complete them before returning to work. Imani picked up Nova, who had started fussing. How are the remaining staff taking it? Better than expected, Rosa replied. Many of them felt trapped in the old system too. They're relieved to see changes coming. The group spent hours finalizing details for the birthing center's reopening. Imani insisted on complete transparency. Patient satisfaction scores, complaint resolutions, and demographic data would all be publicly available through digital dashboards in real time. No more buried reports, she declared. No more silenced voices. Pastor Evelyn, in her new role as patient advocate, would have direct access to hospital leadership. Rosa's promotion to training director meant she could reshape staff education from the ground up. The Bias-Free Care Initiative would ensure every patient received equal treatment, with clear accountability measures. Outside Imani's office windows, workers were already installing new signage at the birthing center. The old Riverbridge logo came down, replaced by fresh lettering announcing the community partnership. A digital display would show the live dashboard data, visible to anyone passing by. Dr. Leland's resignation letter is making rounds, Tai mentioned, checking his phone. Claims he's stepping down to spend time with family. Imani snorted. At least he's leaving quietly. Unlike Mara. They'd all seen the angry interviews Mara had given, claiming she was being persecuted. But the evidence was too strong. The pattern too clear. Her former colleagues' testimonies painted a damning picture of systematic discrimination. The next morning, final preparations were underway for the reopening ceremony. The birthing center's lobby had been transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, and new furniture created welcoming spaces for families. Most importantly, the staff now reflected the diversity of their patient population. Local news crews set up their equipment as community members began arriving. Mothers who had testified at the board meeting came with their children, greeting each other like old friends. Medical students from nearby universities listened intently as Pastor Evelyn shared stories from her midwife days. Rosa directed the new nursing staff, their badges displaying the Bias-Free Care Initiative logo. They moved through the crowd, answering questions and giving tours of the upgraded facilities. The transparency dashboards glowed on wall-mounted screens, already tracking patient feedback. Ready? Tai asked, adjusting Nova's tiny dress. Their daughter wore a onesie printed with "Future CEO," a gift from the hospital staff. Imani smoothed her blazer and checked her note cards one last time. The podium waited outside, surrounded by chairs and cameras. This moment wasn't just about reopening a birthing center, it was about setting a new standard for healthcare equity. Pastor Evelyn took her place near the entrance, her silver hair catching the morning sun. Rosa stood with her team, their faces proud and determined. Community council members lined up, ready to take their official positions. Through the windows, Imani could see the crowd growing. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward. Local officials mingled with medical professionals and community activists. Everyone wanted to witness this change. "The mothers are gathering in the front row," Ty reported, returning from outside. Some brought signs. "Every mother heard," and "Care without bias." Imani held Nova close, breathing in her baby powder scent. Everything she'd fought for, every confrontation, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, had led to this. Not just for Nova, but for every child whose mother deserved to be treated with dignity. The ceremony would begin soon. Photographers adjusted their lenses, focused on the ribbon stretched across the birthing center's entrance. News anchors did sound checks, practiced their opening lines. The crowd settled into their seats, programs rustling in the morning breeze. Rosa approached, carrying a pair of ceremonial scissors. "They're ready for us." Pastor Evelyn joined them, her cane tapping softly on the floor. "Shall we show them what real change looks like?" Together, they moved toward the entrance, where the future waited with open arms. The old power structures had crumbled, making way for something new, something built on equality, accountability, and trust. A week after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Imani pushed open the glass doors of the birthing center. Nova nestled against her chest in a soft wrap carrier. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm patterns across the newly renovated lobby. The transformation was striking. Gone were the stark institutional walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Instead, plush seating areas in soothing earth tones created intimate spaces for families. Local artists' work, depicting motherhood in all its diversity, adorned the walls. The transparency dashboard glowed quietly in one corner, showing real-time patient satisfaction scores and care metrics. "Good morning, Ms. Caldwell," called Maria, one of the new front desk staff. Her genuine smile reflected the changed atmosphere of the place. Other staff members moved through the space with purpose, but without the former rigid formality. They stopped to chat with patients, offering support and guidance rather than judgment. Several mothers looked up and waved as Imani entered. One was bottle-feeding her infant, while her toddler played quietly in the new children's corner. Another helped her pregnant friend fill out paperwork. The lobby hummed with quiet conversation and occasional baby sounds. "Welcome back," Rosa said, emerging from a hallway with her tablet. She'd grown into her role as training director, carrying herself with new confidence. "The Morning Mothers group just finished. They're raving about the new lactation support program." Imani nodded, feeling Nova start to stir. "That's wonderful. How are the new protocols working out?" "Better than we hoped. Staff reports show increased patient engagement, and our satisfaction scores keep climbing." Rosa gestured to the dashboard. "Especially among our Black and brown mothers." A young resident hurried past, then backtracked. "Ms. Caldwell, I wanted to thank you. That cultural competency training last week really opened my eyes. I'm already applying what we learned." "That's exactly what we want to hear," Imani replied, noting how the resident maintained eye contact rather than talking down to her. The change in staff behavior wasn't just surface-level politeness, it reflected deeper understanding. Nova began making her hungry sounds, and Imani moved toward one of the comfortable seating areas. This particular spot, bathed in natural light near a small indoor fountain, had been deliberately designed for nursing mothers. The quiet burble of water provided gentle privacy without isolation. As she settled into the cushioned chair, Imani felt a momentary flash of memory. Mara's angry face, the sting of the slap, the humiliation. But the phantom pain faded quickly, replaced by the present reality. Now, mothers nursed openly throughout the center, supported rather than shamed. Pastor Evelyn's voice carried from the hallway as she conducted a tour for visiting healthcare administrators. "Notice how our space reflects our values," she was saying. "Every design choice, every policy, every interaction is meant to uplift and support our mothers." Imani adjusted Nova and began nursing, completely at ease. A pregnant woman nearby caught her eye and smiled in solidarity. On the wall above them hung the new plaque, its bronze letters catching the sunlight. Every mother heard. The plaque had been Rosa's idea, but the whole community had embraced it. It wasn't just words. It was a promise, backed by actionable policies and constant vigilance. The Quarterly Review Council would meet next week, examining everything from staff training to patient outcomes. Through the windows, Imani could see the community garden they'd started, where mothers grew herbs and vegetables while sharing wisdom. Inside, the Resource Center offered everything from legal aid to nutrition counseling. Every aspect of care was now viewed through the lens of equity and dignity. Nova unlatched and yawned, milk-drunk and content. Imani gently burped her, remembering how different this same scene had been just weeks ago. Now, security cameras monitored for patient protection rather than intimidation. Staff badges prominently displayed the bias-free care pledge. Even the intake forms had been redesigned to be more inclusive and respectful. "Look who's here!" Ty's voice broke through her thoughts. He'd stopped by on his lunch break, carrying a bag that smelled like her favorite sandwich shop. "How are my girls doing?" "Perfect," Imani replied, shifting to make room for him. "Nova just finished her lunch, too." They sat together, watching the lobby's peaceful flow of activity. A nurse demonstrated proper swaddling technique to new parents. A doula led a breathing exercise with an anxious mother-to-be. Every interaction reflected the new culture they'd fought to create. "The state medical board called," Ty mentioned quietly. "They want you to speak at their annual conference about implementing bias-free care standards." Imani nodded, unsurprised. Their story had sparked similar changes across the healthcare system. Other facilities were reaching out, eager to learn from their example. The ripples of their victory continued to spread. Nova dozed against her chest, completely relaxed. Imani stroked her daughter's tiny back, marveling at how peaceful she looked. In this space that had once been a battlefield, they now sat in perfect tranquility. "You know," Ty said, watching them both with soft eyes, "she'll never remember the fight. She'll only know this: being safe, being respected, being heard." Imani leaned closer to Nova's ear, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll grow up knowing we fought for you. And we won." I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.